Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Little Things of Orbis. Today I want to bring us back to a question that was posed in the early days of Epic 7. It's not going to be as grand as the genesis of Epic 7 or the Chandra Prophecy, which I encourage you to check out, links in the description or in the card above. But it's still something that many new players might still be in the dark about. This topic, believe it or not, also touches briefly into how DJ's restoration powers play out in the broader story, so that will be a bonus tidbit of lore to uncover. So I figure I'll address it all here as a little thing of Orbis. Kise is a beloved character. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone playing Epic 7 who does not either know of her from the story or having been cleaved on by her. And with the recent Moonlight Selector, you will have an opportunity to attain her into your rosters, although I would suggest against it as her strength as a cleaver can be achieved by other characters that do the same function as her and are much easier to attain. A few of the other choices in the Selector have roles that cannot be easily filled by another character or even with multiple characters in tandem, but I digress. Get whichever Moonlight's 5-star that tickles your fancy. First off, let's dive into Kisei's lore, and as we go through it, I'll let you know my personal answer to our question on how many Kiseis there are in the story at the very end. And once we're done, you can decide for yourself. Kise is one of the Nocturnes, a people that were created by the lower god Lunaris to assist in the protection of Orbis and Dice from the Dark Nebula. They are imbued with Lunaris' power and devoted to the care of the world, where the ordinary humans in Britannia more or less live their lives by their own devices. They are also immune to Dice's restoration amnesia, so they are able to remember every single world that has come and gone. Their home of Düsselnork, I hope that's how you pronounce it, is a cold, mountainous land far up in the northwest, by the ocean, hidden away from the rest of the continent, possibly even on purpose. They rarely leave their land because they are not affected by Dice's restoration amnesia, they would become liable if the regular populace discovered the truth about their existence and the history of the world being restored over and over. As a result, they would only exit their land whenever there was some kind of diplomatic event occurring where they would most likely have to introduce themselves again to the world that had been restored and knew nothing about the past. This also means that even though the world of Orbis had only lived through 20 years of the Archdemon's attacks, the Nocturnes have actually lived hundreds of years through at least 6 different worlds. It is unclear if the Nocturnes age, but from Ludwig's account, he is much older than he looks, revealing that he has aged internally, but his body has remained young. Either this or the Nocturnes are reborn just like the rest of Orbis, but they simply retain their memories. We do see in Kisei's side story that Ludwig looks exactly the same in the 6th world as he does in the 7th world, so I would conclude from this that their bodies don't actually age very quickly, and that they are not actually reborn with each Archdemon cycle. In this side story, we are introduced to 3 Nocturnes, Ludwig, Saskia, and Kise. Saskia would go on to lead many of the Nocturnes to sacrifice their power to assist Dien in the sealing of the Archdemon during the 7th War when Ras was late to awaken. Ludwig would remain in Düsselnork in despair as his fellow Nocturnes would be sacrificed to seal away the Archdemon without him knowing why, because Saskia left him behind. This would build in him a great resentment for the world until Ras would eventually meet and understand his grief and finally provide him with greater purpose. And finally, we have Kise. She is the leader of the Nocturnes when we encounter her as early as her side story, which presumably takes place in the 6th world because of how she has yet to accept Dice's calling for her as one of Ras's heirs. It is curious to note that in Kisei's side story, she mentions that not enough time has passed for those who knew him in the outside world to have forgotten him. suggesting that Ludwig has met people from outside of Dusselnork before, and that this is most likely an indication that Dieche's power of resurrecting the world and causing everyone to forget the last world has already begun to wane. The Nocturnes have already determined this as a fact, and are adjusting with countermeasures against it. The side story, Prayer to the Waxing Moon, starts with Kise and Ludwig going to a festival celebrating the new year, near Destina's shrine, which is located nearer to Dusselnork than Ezra's is, where a larger festival is being held, but Kise thinks that Ludwig is still too immature to go there, and is afraid that he will like the outside world too much, and just won't want to go back to Dusselnork. At the festival near Destina's shrine, there they meet Ruel, the successor of the Spirit Lord of Light, who offers to make Ludwig more comfortable by doing a fortune reading. Kise reveals her disdain for such religious acts, but Ludwig appears to be having a lot of fun, so Kise allows him to continue the experience. Later on, Ludwig irresponsibly leaves for the festival again to get souvenirs for Saskia that he had forgotten, because she was the one that had convinced Kise to let him go in the first place. But Kise discovers this and urgently rushes off in pursuit. This is where we are introduced to Prince Alfred in a flashback, soon to be the King of Tiranor. Some time ago, he and Kise met each other after Kise had left Dusselnork. This is evident to her comparing Ludwig with herself when she mentions, "I knew it. I knew he would leave us if he ever experienced the outside world," recalling a time when she too felt the pull of the outside world between her and Alfred. It's very curious to note that Kise also says, "Some left voluntarily, fascinated by the ordinary lives lived by humans, and some were made to leave against their will, because they were chosen as an heir," suggesting to me that there could have been a Nocturne heir in every world. Kise was simply the newest one, and then during the 7th world, Ludwig, being the only Nocturne left, became an heir as well. Anyhow, Ludwig gets lost and meets a bunch of goblins, who try to extort him for knowledge about a great king's treasure located somewhere in Dusselnork. Ludwig discovers that the goblins only helped him to get information out of him, and they attack him when he confesses that he has no idea what they're talking about. Kise intervenes just in the nick of time and saves him. Later, Kise tries to strengthen Ludwig's resolve to stay in Dusselnork by showing him a cavern where the Nocturnes of old crafted amulets to protect those they cared about. Ludwig acknowledges that he believed that the outside world was just full of wonder and excitement, but he now realizes that his encounter with the goblins, that there are forces out there that are dangerous, and promises that he'll never leave Dusselnork again. 3 days pass, and Ludwig seemingly breaks his promise. Kise, enraged and fearful of the worst, sets off to find Ludwig again. She discovers him in the cavern, creating an amulet for her. He confesses that he just wanted her to be happy, and Kise wrestles with the fact that maybe she is being too rough with him. Ludwig laments that he was not able to make an amulet for Saskia, and Kise tells him that they will make one together. Now, it's important to note that when Kise refers to the making of amulets, she is referring to the fact that she gave her amulet to Prince Alfred. This, I believe, is the same amulet that Krau gives to Diane to prove her worthiness to enter Dusselnork in the Eulogy of a Saint side story. For now, we have found one Kise that exists, and the second version of Kise is when she accepts her role as heir with Ras and becomes Judge Kise. However, there is a third and a possible fourth Kise that we should be aware of. The third Kise is a shade, a copy of Kise that was created by the Moonside Lake in her side story. Kise berates Saskia for stopping her from meeting Alfred at the lake like they had promised, most likely to protect Kise from revealing herself as a Nocturne to the outside world, or Saskia was just afraid that Kise would abandon her position in the Nocturnes to be together with Alfred, just like Kise was afraid about Ludwig. Apparently, the lake, being a bastion of Lunaris' power, created a shade from Kise's desire, who would take the place of the real Kise and meet with Alfred instead. The shade would then leave Dusselnork with him to become the Queen of Tiranor. Alright. This is where it gets a little spicy. During the main story, we learn about the King of Tiranor going insane to find his lost wife that had disappeared. He attempted to recreate her using homunculi technology, birthing who arguably is the fourth Kisei, Sigrid, a homunculus born out of the Kisei shade's DNA. But how did the queen disappear, you may be asking? This is somewhat contested, but the leading theory is that the shade could only exist as long as the real Kisei was still alive. So when the sixth world was destroyed and recreated, Kisei, being an heir, did not resurrect. But then, if the world was restored and everyone's memories were erased, how did the King of Tiranor remember Kisei enough to go insane? I honestly could not rack my brain around this until recently I realized that if the Kisei Shade and Prince Alfred had become married before the Archdemon arrived on Orbis, then Diché's restoration would only have stretched back to after they were married. Thus, King Alfred would have remembered his wife, regardless of which world it was. So now I must correct myself too. Earlier I mentioned that this side story was taking place in the sixth world, but if the Archdemon had not yet arrived on Orbis yet, as evidenced by the state of the world shown in the side story, then this story actually takes place on the original world of Orbis, the first world. With Judge Kise having not been resurrected, the queen would also have disappeared, causing the king to go mad in search for her, leading to the terrible events that transpired in Tiranor in the present day. Phew, finally, that's over and done with. So at the end of all of this, I would just conclude that there are 4 versions of Kisei in the game. Normal Kisei, or Blue Kisei, Judge Kisei, the Kisei Shade, and Sigrid, who is a homunculi based off of Kisei's DNA, and is the likely reason for why both of them are accustomed to using scythes. That last one might be hotly contested, but I think it still counts. Again, I want to reiterate for the longest time that I and the rest of the community could not wrap our heads around how the Tiranor king could have recalled Kisei after having been from an earlier restored world. But if the Kisei Shade and Alfred had married before the Archdemon War, then it would make sense that Alfred would reawaken in the 7th world assuming that he already had a wife, only to find that she was nowhere to be found. I'll be honest, even though this was such a tiny part of the narrative of Epic 7, I was blown away by how much this discovery complicated Epic 7's story for me. When I first went through Chapter 9 and first learned about the events of Tiranor with Prince Friedrich, his father Alfred, and Krau, I just left myself confused and moved on. But now this fills such a glaring hole in the lore, and it just makes Episode 1 feel so much more complete. So, what did you think? Did you already know how Kisei's story worked? Are you going to be getting Kisei in your Moonlight Selector? Did you agree that there are only 4 Kiseis in the story? Let me and the community know in the comments below, as well as any other lore significant topics that you would like covered on this channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, because it really helps the algorithm get these videos to more people who may also have incredible takes on this simple yet intricate collection of lore, and that it can only expand from here. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep it real.